Okay, Tom, we're ready.
Well, here we are, accepting a new set of batteries down the forehatch. Here's my mate Stuart, a strong young man. He's passing them down with a good will, one after another. We're doing it in a safe way. We could try and manhand them down the companionway, but the worry is that we'll mash the varnish as we do. So this is it, down they come, one after the other. And the story of why we're having these new batteries, that's it on the deck, is a bit of a saga really. And I'm going to tell you all about that in a moment, but we've got 3 more to go, so we'd better crack on. So we're replacing all my domestic batteries, and actually we're replacing the very large battery that lives in the forecastle and drives the bow thruster and the windlass at the same time. Now, how this has come about is a bit of a saga actually, so I'm going to just walk you through it. Here's how it all began. It all started once upon a time last summer. That's 15 months ago now, because I'm in Nynäshamn in Sweden in a marina, and it all began in Denmark when we put a new fridge in the boat, and it rapidly became apparent that the electrics were not coping, and my domestic batteries, which consist basically of 4 100 amp hour, at that stage 4 100 amp hour wet cell batteries, was not coping. They'd had it. They'd been in there for 8 years. They'd been reasonably well looked after and they'd served their time, but they were shot. So out they came, and the question was, what was I going to replace them with? Now time moves on, doesn't it? And we have to live with the times. So I talked with the guys at the yard down in Denmark, and the consensus of opinion was that I should replace these old lead acid batteries with modern AGM batteries, gel batteries with all sorts of magical properties. I wasn't sure about that because I'd been quite happy with the old wet cell batteries. I'd used them all my life. I knew where I was with them. They're not expensive, and I've been happy enough, but I'm always prepared to listen to what people tell me, especially people who are experts, especially if you're paying for an expert. You're mad if you don't listen to him, aren't you? So in went the AGMs, and you know what? They never charged properly. If you've been around batteries a little while, you'll know that when you plug your chargers in, whatever it is, whether it's the alternator running off the engine, whether it's a shore power, or whether it's your genset if you've got one, you look to see 14 volts and a bit more on the voltmeter. That proves that batteries are way up above standard voltage and they're pouring power in. Well, it never happened. I couldn't get them over 13 volts, and I talked to the guys about it, and they said, oh, well, it's probably that they were so well charged up and your boat's drawing so little power that they don't really want any more than that. So I accepted that, and off I went sailing. And all that summer, I could never get them to take as much power as I wanted. And I thought maybe that was how it had to be. I wasn't sure. I didn't like it, but there it is. I had other things to think about. So this summer, it all started again. No charge in the batteries, only this summer it got worse and worse. They had been charged a couple of times over the winter, so we had looked after them, but they just didn't want to take charge. And there were 2 questions here. The first answer is, or rather there are 2 answers here. The first answer is, the batteries are no good. Well, that seemed unlikely. The other answer is, my charger's no good, it's not working. Well, it had worked very well until I put these batteries in. So maybe, just maybe, it was incompatible with the batteries. So I read the manual carefully, and the manual did say you can use this with AGM batteries. So I set all it up, did all the little switches, made sure everything was where it should be, and they still wouldn't take any charge. And it was getting dire, and 2 weeks ago, the batteries, I woke up one morning, they were down to 11 volts. And I'd just been in a marina the night before, and they were charged right up. So I spent a night on anchor, down go the batteries. What's going on? This is not right. So I had a little battery that I always keep for spare, and I hooked that up to the domestic supply so that it would drive what I needed just to run the boat for a short while. And I moved the boat straight from there down to here at Nynäshamn, which was about 45 miles away from where I was anchored. And the good thing about Nynäshamn is that my mate Stu lives here, Stu from Advantage Marine, and we go back a little way, and Stu is very good at all this stuff, so I thought I'd have a chat with him about it, and maybe between us, and with a bit of help from Roz as well, who's not just dug up, we could come up with a diagnostic solution for what was going on. So away I went. The wind was right on the nose and I wanted to get here, so we motor sailed down here to windward, and we'd not been gone 10 miles, but I came down below to do a bit of navigation, and there was a horrible smell down here. It smelled like the septic tank had burst or something. Awful, nasty, rotten egg smell. I've smelt that before. I went up forward and the smell got worse, and I went to where the big battery, the 200 amp hour battery that drives those two big things up forward was, and I lifted the lid, and it smelt vile in there. The battery had it, and that's what happens. This is a really important symptom. If your batteries are really on the edge and are becoming dangerously discharged and dangerous to man and beast, they start smelling of hydrogen sulfide. Do not ignore that, whatever you do, because they might blow up, they might throw a side out with horrible consequences. So I did what I had to do. I first of all turned that battery right off. It carried on smelling. I put my hand on it. It was almost too hot to touch. So I disconnected all its wires, all its cables, took them off and left it, opened everything up in there so that the air could circulate, and left it to come to terms with itself, and rushed on down to Newnesham. When we got to Newnesham, Stuart comes on board. He took one look at the battery, put his hand on it, he said, "This has got to go. We got it off the battery. We got it off the boat as soon as, look at you." Off it went. Dear me, couldn't get it on the dock quick enough. And then we had to go out and find ourselves some new domestic batteries. Now, the question was, what had gone wrong? Had the dying big battery up forward destroyed the AGM batteries? Or had the AGM batteries, perhaps not being compatible with the charger, decided that they would ring the death knell on the big battery up forward? Well, we didn't really know. But what we did know was that we had a charger, we had shore power, and we thought, if we get a half-charged 12-volt wet cell battery, an old-fashioned lead-acid battery, which I knew it always used to charge, and we put it on where the domestic supply goes, we put it in, tighten up the terminals, and hook up the shore power, see what happens. So we did. And of course, as always, for about 15 seconds, nothing happened at all while the charger was sniffing the battery and thinking about it. And then a great whoop of joy came out of Stuart, and he said, "Look at this!" And it had gone up. We had 14.5 volts. Bingo! So we'd proved that there was nothing wrong with the charger. Good diagnostics, you see. We'd got that sorted. So then all we had to do was get a load more lead acid batteries, which he was obviously happy to charge, and we'll put them in where the AGMs had been. The AGMs, meanwhile, we'd put them on a smart charger which Stuart produced, and that would tell us if they were any good or not. They were dead as mutton, absolutely shot. So they're on their way ashore. The new batteries are going in, and in a minute I'll be able to tell you what's happening. Stuart's working away down here all the time I'm talking. He's a good man, isn't he? You know, I mean, a lot of people would expect me to do this, but he's doing it for me. What a good man. What a pal. And up forward, in a little while, we're going to put the big battery in and hook that up. And I think that'll be absolutely fine, because it had obviously had a hard time. I should tell you that the old one was 8-9 years old. It had served its time and probably had come to the end of the trail anyway. We never really knew what had caused what to fail, but the diagnostic process proved that the charger was okay so long as we were asking it to do what we knew it could do. What it couldn't do, it seems, was charge AGMs. Well, we're all hooked up, we're both stood here, and we're ready to go for it. So we're going to switch on, batteries on first, shore power on, inverter on, the inverter being also the charger, and specs on, so I can see what's happening. And what have we got? Well, looks like we've got 12.5 volts static, which is very encouraging. It means that the batteries are in there, they're doing what they should do. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to see if they start charging, and I think that will probably happen any minute now. The AC amperes is starting to come up, and look at this! Look at this! 14 volts! 14 volts! We haven't seen 14 volts from the domestic batteries since 2021, springtime. So it's happy days. That's worked. So Stuart, that's the result. I don't think we need worry about what's going to happen with the big battery and the bows. If those are working, everything else is going to work too. So we can do it, and then we can go and pour ourselves a large whiskey. What do you say?
Fantastic.
Okay,
Yeah.
There you are. So listen, I've learned a lot from this exercise, as I always do. I'm learning all my sweet life, and the big message from this is, if you don't want your boat to catch fire, look out for the smell of rotten eggs, and don't assume it's the holding tank. It could be a battery just about to blow.